Chapter 4. The Designers, Past and Present. When William Willet and his wife Anne founded the studio in the late 19th century, they set out to build a studio that would produce some of the greatest stained glass the world has ever known. They had a vision and sowed a seed that has been cultivated by many skilled designers, painters, craftsmen, visionaries, and administrators to follow. Many distinguished stained glass artists have influenced the studio's design tradition. In addition to the artists listed here, Willet Hauser Architectural Glass Incorporated has also worked with internationally known artists from outside of the stained glass industry, including designers such as Georgi Kepish, Ben Shahn, and Jacob Landau, as well as many other respected artisans. George Gugert. Designer and family friend George Gugert, 1878 to 1958, began his career with the Willet Studio in 1912, creating works first with William and Anne Lee Willet, and later in 1921 with Henry Lee Willet. A dedicated friend and colleague, Gugert assisted Henry Lee Willet following his firing from the Willet Stained Glass and Decorating Company, offering his home in West Philadelphia as a studio for the fellow artist and businessman. His treasured oeuvre for the studio spans 48 years, for he spent the greater part of his life in the designing and cartooning of stained glass, working passionately until his death in 1958 at the age of 80. Born in 1878, Gugert studied under Howard Freeman Stratton at Drexel Institute of Technology, now Drexel University, and also attended the Pennsylvania Museum and School of Industrial Art. His stained glass designs can be seen in such notable examples as the Cadet Chapel at West Point, Grosse Pointe Memorial Presbyterian Church, Grosse Pointe Farms, Michigan, the National Episcopal Cathedral in Washington, D.C., Chicago Theological Seminary, the Graduate College at Princeton University, Westminster Presbyterian in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. He was a member of the Philadelphia Art Alliance, an associate member of the Stained Glass Association of America, and served on the board of directors at Willet Studio. Aside from his stained glass, his greatest interest was sculpture. He designed the Phi Kappa Psi Monument at Washington and Jefferson College in Washington, Pennsylvania, the Ritchie Memorial Cross in Omaha, Nebraska, and a bust of John Calvin for the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On page 26 is a photograph of stained glass artist and family friend George Gugert working in his home studio on Girard Avenue, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Gugert's home served as the location of the Willet Studios in the early years of the 1900s, following the death of William Willet in 1921. On page 27 is a photograph of a stained glass window, an example of George Gugert's designs depicting the Nativity of Christ and the Sermon on the Mount for Westminster Presbyterian Church in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which shows the artist's adept use of light and color. John Aram Kevorkian. Artist and stained glass designer John Aram Kevorkian, 1902 to 1991, designed for the Willet Studios for many years. Born in Philadelphia in 1902, Kevorkian was a nephew to Miriam H. Kevorkian, a well-known portrait painter who had a great influence on his artistic career. Following in her footsteps, he became a portrait painter in addition to being an accomplished photographer. A graduate of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, he started his stained glass career working for the Paula Bolano Studio in Philadelphia. At the Willet Studios, he served as an accomplished cartoonist and designer. A few of the churches having windows designed by John Aram Kevorkian include St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Haddon Heights, New Jersey, St. Catherine of Siena Catholic Church in Baltimore, Maryland, and Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. On page 28 is an example of John Aram Kevorkian's skills as a portrait painter, which he inherited from his aunt, Miriam H. Kevorkian. The portrait depicts Henry Lee Willet, and the inscription reads, "To my friend, Henry Lee Willet." Erik Sundin. Erik Sundin, 1924 to 2003, was a prolific designer of stained glass for the Willet Studios. After serving in the United States Army during World War II, Sundin completed a bachelor's degree at Yale School of Fine Arts in 1949. He began his career in art by teaching for 2 years at Albertus Magnus College in New Haven, Connecticut. In the early 1950s, he entered the field of stained glass at the studio of Heinecke and Smith of New York City. While there, he designed windows for Cornell University Chapel and fabricated a panel for the American abstract expressionist artist Adolf Gottlieb for the New Work Show sponsored by the Stained Glass Association of America. He also worked in design for the fashion industry in New York and Philadelphia before being introduced to the Willets and joining the firm in 1964. A versatile artist, Sundin was proficient in different styles and media. He was equally at home designing with faceted or leaded glass. Knowledge gained in the fashion industry benefited him when designing the costumes of biblical and other historical figures pictured in stained glass. His extensive interest in iconography and symbolism enabled him to effectively illustrate stories depicted in the windows. Windows designed by Sundin while at Willet Studios are found in many states. Notable among these are the following, as well as many others: the Second Baptist Church in Houston, Texas, First Presbyterian Church, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri, and the Scottish Rite Temple in Indianapolis, Indiana. On the left on this page is depicted Erik Sundin's design for the Light of the World window, First Presbyterian Church, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Marguerite Godin. Marguerite Godin, 1909 to 1991, spent nearly 60 years designing windows for the Willet Studios. She joined the studio in 1931, shortly after graduating from the Philadelphia College of Art. Within a decade, she became the studio's principal designer and later its director and vice president. Among her notable designs were those for the last 6 windows in the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in New York City, all of the windows in the National Presbyterian Church and Chapel in Washington, D.C., and a series of nave windows in San Francisco's Grace Episcopal Cathedral. She also created the design for one of the largest installations of faceted glass in the world, the 30,000-square-foot walls for the Hall of Science at the 1964 to 1965 World's Fair in New York. Regarded as an active and very productive artist, she was also known for her wry sense of humor, which was apparent in some of her work. One particular instance involved the depiction of the Peanuts character Schroeder in a music-themed window at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Buffalo, New York. On the next page is a detail of that window, showing Schroeder playing his toy piano alongside Dr. Albert Schweitzer, and next to that, a letter from Charles Schulz granting permission to use his character Schroeder in the window, and that's dated February 3, 1967. Godin also depicted the well-known character performing the music of Beethoven beside such luminaries as Palestrina, Luther, Bach, and Ralph Vaughan Williams. Along with her work in stained glass, Godin was a highly skilled calligrapher. She designed and made hundreds of ornamental illuminated commemorative scrolls for such notables as Presidents Hoover, Eisenhower, Nixon, Carter, and Bush, Generals Omar Bradley and Douglas MacArthur, political leaders John Foster Dulles and Ralph Bunche, as well as for generations of honorary members and fellows of the Stained Glass Association of America. On the next page is a photograph of Marguerite Godin with a selection of her Willet gold designs, and on the right, a detail of a rose window designed by Godin at Grace Episcopal Church in San Francisco, California. While Marguerite was equally at home with both traditional and modern design, perhaps her most unique creation was the development of Mr. Willet's dream of a stained glass window that would be beautiful both day and night. Working together with Willet, she combined colored glass with an overlay of lead sculpture flown with gold leaf, creating the Willet sculptured gold window. Not only did she design the original sample panel, but she also designed the Lumiere transparency for the glory window in the Westwood Community Methodist Church in Los Angeles, which she completed in 1951. It was the first example of this type of window in the country. Her last work for the Willet Studios was a window for Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church. It depicts the arts of man and shows Louis Comfort Tiffany, Henry Lee Willet, and Marguerite Godin herself representing the art of stained glass. On the next page is a photograph of Godin's final work for the Willet Studio, Music and the Arts, for Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church. In the window's left lancet, second panel from the bottom, Godin immortalized herself, Henry Lee Willet, Louis Comfort Tiffany, and Russian-French artist Marc Chagall to represent the art of stained glass. Benoit Gil Sol. Longtime Willet designer Benoit Gil Sol, 1914 to 2000, was born in Namur, Belgium, in 1914. After completing his studies in Greek-Latin humanities, he entered the prestigious Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts, the top Belgian art college, from which he graduated in 1938. Upon graduation from the Academy, he traveled extensively in Italy, France, and Spain, painting and drawing continuously. By 1958, he became the president of the Association des Artistes Belges, where he remained honorary president until his death in 2000. In 1960, he was awarded the commission to execute the murals in the Salle de Reception of the Belgian line in Antwerp. That same year, the Belgian government sent him to the United States on a grant to study the situation of the arts abroad. Enamored during his stay, Gil Sol quickly fell in love with America, and upon his return to Belgium, decided to resettle in the United States with his family. He received his American citizenship in 1967. Gil Sol began to design and work extensively in stained glass in 1960. 3 years later, he joined the Willet Studios, serving as a staff designer and painter before opening his own studio in New York, which he operated until his death. His vast work in the field of stained glass was augmented by his varied interests in other art forms, such as printmaking, tapestries, and sculpture. Some commissions designed by Benoit Gil Sol while he was a staff designer for Willet Studios include the Tillman Chapel at the Church Center for the United Nations, New York, New York; Faith Lutheran Church, Rochester, New York; First American Lutheran Church in Oslo, Norway; Asbury Methodist Church in Allentown, Pennsylvania; the Alice Miller Chapel at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois; and Temple Beth Zion in Buffalo, New York, in which he adapted a painting by Lithuanian-born American artist Ben Shahn into stained glass. On that same page is a photograph of a detail from one of his windows, Lamb of God, in the Faith Lutheran Church, Rochester, New York. The next page shows the design for the Hand of God window, Asbury Methodist Church, Allentown, Pennsylvania. And just to the right of that, a faceted dove, symbolizing hope, part of a series depicting symbols from Corinthians 13:13 for Ascension Lutheran Church, East Lansing, Michigan. Anthony A. Mako. Anthony A. Mako, 1921 to 1988, known commonly as Tony, was a nationally recognized artist whose work in stained glass has adorned hundreds of architectural settings. During his career, which lasted more than 4 decades, he designed detailed windows for churches, synagogues, mausoleums, private homes, and universities. A Hungarian-born artist, he attended the Metropolitan Industrial Art School in Budapest and the Academy of Applied Art in Vienna, Austria, before emigrating to the United States in the early 1950s. Mako first worked for the Case Studio in Reading, Pennsylvania, before leaving in 1958 to work as a designer for the Willet Studios. He remained there until 1980, leaving to partner with Vincenzo Siriani and Henry Willet's daughter, Anne Willet Kellogg, in their own studio, Anne Willet Stained Glass Atelier. He continued there until his health began to fail. Mako was a versatile artist, adept in a vast range of styles, both abstract and traditional. A very diligent artist who devoted much time to researching his work and perfecting his craft, he was known for specializing in Eastern European art. Together with Henry Willet, he introduced the process of farbigem, a stained glass sculpturing technique that involves adhering glass pieces together with specialized glues, to the United States. Examples of his work using the farbigem process at the Willet Studios can be found at the Riverside Park United Methodist Church in Jacksonville, Florida. There is a photograph of Anthony Mako designing in the Chestnut Hill studio, and on the next page, a photograph of a farbigem window designed by Anthony Mako for Riverside Park United Methodist Church, Jacksonville, Florida, and a detail of that window showing the three-dimensional use of layered glass. He also designed thousands of stained glass windows in his lifetime, mostly for fabrication with the Willet Studios. Examples of his artistry can be found at St. Anthony's of Padua Academy in Wilmington, Delaware, Grace Episcopal Church in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Har Zion Temple in Penn Valley, Pennsylvania, Shomrei Habrith Synagogue in Reading, Pennsylvania, Forest Lawn Mausoleum in Glendale, California, Children's Chapel of the Ascension in Westminster, Maryland, and the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. At the time of his death in 1988, at the age of 67, he was survived by his wife, Margaret Mako, his daughter, Ildiko Barrymore, and a granddaughter, actor Drew Barrymore. Odell Prather. Odell Prather, 1912 to 2001, or Billy, as she preferred to be called, was born in Wichita, Kansas. She was gifted in music but contracted tuberculosis in her teens, which eliminated the possibility of touring as a concert violinist. While recuperating, she began to study drawing and then painting with German artist Max Marcini. She married during World War II, and after the war moved to Philadelphia, where she began to study with Henry Pitts at the Philadelphia College of Art. She became an illustrator for the children's magazine Children's Activities and Jack and Jill, which were published in Philadelphia. Her early designs for stained glass show this influence. In 1951, she was introduced to Henry Lee Willet and began to work as a staff designer for Willet Studio, continuing into the 1960s. During these years, she commuted to New York to study at the Art Students League with Morris Cantor and Byron Brown. Gradually, her designs became more abstract, and more of her work was fabricated in faceted glass. She also studied sculpture with Raphael Sabatini at Temple University's Tyler School of Art. After leaving Willet Studios to freelance as a stained glass designer, her work was fabricated by a variety of studios. She also began to produce sculptures, some small and some monumental. She won a silver medal for creative sculpture from the National Arts Club of New York and the Woodmere Endowment Fund Memorial Prize. Additionally, Prather wrote occasional articles about ecclesiastical art, promoting new forms and shapes rather than old-fashioned sentimental realism. On the left, there is a photograph of Odell Billy Prather with a section of the sculptured baptismal font she designed for Christ United Methodist Church, Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, and then, on the right of that, the completed baptismal font in situ. The next page shows the crucifixion design for St. James Episcopal Church, Montclair, New Jersey. The work is an example of Odell Prather's early work in leaded glass window design for the Willet Studio. Columcille Sharkey. Columcille Sharkey, 1922 to 2000, was born into a stained glass family. His father, Edwin J. Sharkey, was an accomplished designer and glass painter who for many years was the head designer for the famed DeScenzo Studio of Philadelphia. Edwin J. Sharkey came from Ireland, resettling his family in the United States when Columcille Sharkey was an infant. Sharkey's formal artistic training began in high school with evening classes at the Fleischer Art Memorial in Philadelphia, then known as the Graphic Sketch Club. Following graduation, he served in the U.S. Navy during the Second World War. Upon his return to Philadelphia, Sharkey took advantage of an opportunity to study at the Hussein School of Art. Organized following the passing of the GI Bill, the school was established to provide training in fine art to veterans returning from war. With insistence from his father, who had opened his own studio following his departure from DeScenzo, Sharkey joined Edwin's small studio, Church Crafts, to assist in the completion of a large commission following graduation. Tragically, Edwin passed away before the project could be realized, leaving his son to finish the work and run the studio. Desiring to focus on art rather than the sales side of a business, Sharkey joined the studio of Edward J. Byrne in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, to design church interiors. 6 years later, in 1967, he joined the Willet Studios as a staff designer. Having been an apprentice to his father, it's no wonder that the design styles of the two men are very similar. Even experienced Willet staff have difficulty telling the work of the two apart. Both men designed in a very distinctive traditional style that continues to be very popular with church congregations desiring very fine traditional likenesses. His role as a senior traditional staff designer for Willet Hauser continued until his death in 2001. His designs adorn hundreds of churches in all regions of the United States. Among them are Washington Hall at West Point Military Academy, the Church of the Ascension in Knoxville, Tennessee, St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church in Westchester, Pennsylvania, the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist in Spokane, Washington, and memorial windows to Presidents Garfield and Johnson at the National City Christian Church in Washington, D.C. The illustration shows Colum Sharkey's Christ the King stained glass design for Grace Episcopal Church, Ponca City, Oklahoma. Sharkey's attention to detail and use of realism can be seen in the artist's depiction of the face of Christ. On the next page is a photo of Colum Sharkey's Ascension stained glass design for Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in Waterbury, Connecticut. Kenneth Crocker. British artist Kenneth Crocker began a 5-year apprenticeship in stained glass with J. Whipple & Company in Exeter, England, on his 15th birthday in 1949. While there, Crocker worked under the tutelage of some of the country's finest stained glass artists of the day, including Arthur Arridge, George Cooper Abbs, and Frederick Cole. The apprenticeship required work in the shop on all aspects of the stained glass process for 4 days a week. It also included formal instruction at Exeter College of Art 1 day and 2 evenings a week. Upon completion of his apprenticeship, Crocker began drawing cartoons or full-scale designs for the studio's designers before working solely as a stained glass designer. Here's a picture of artist Kenneth Crocker designing in the Chestnut Hill studio in the 1960s. By 1955, Crocker received the annual Diploma of Merit from the Worshipful Company of Glaziers and Painters of Glass, the esteemed English Guild of Stained Glass Artisans, and in 1961 was elected to the British Society of Master Glass Painters. A year later, he happened upon the address of the Willet Studio in an American stained glass magazine. Knowing that most of the work produced by stained glass firms in England was for American churches, Crocker wrote to the Willet Studio and was soon offered a job. That year in 1962, he set out for the United States with nothing more than 2 suitcases and a desire to further his craft. For 8 years, Crocker worked at the Willet Studio before leaving to open his own studio and teach art in Philadelphia. In 1980, Crocker closed the doors of his studio to return to England. 11 years later, he re-established himself with the Willet Studio, freelancing from England until 1996. That year he returned to the United States, this time settling in Minnesota to design and paint at the studio's Winona location. Shortly thereafter, Crocker returned to Philadelphia to continue designing fine stained glass for Willet Hauser Architectural Glass Incorporated until his retirement from the studio in 2014. In the time that Crocker was employed by the Willet Studio, and later Willet Hauser, he designed hundreds of windows. His work graces churches throughout the United States and Canada, including St. Mark's Episcopal Church, Jacksonville, Florida, St. Isidore's Roman Catholic Church, Columbus, Nebraska, Bethany Bible College, New Brunswick, Canada, and the Episcopal Church of Saints Peter and Paul, Marietta, Georgia. There is a photo on the right of the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist window design by Kenneth Crocker. It was Crocker's distinctive figural work that led him to continuing the work of Charles J. Connick at the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist in Spokane, Washington. This historic commission began in the mid-1920s and lasted until the unfortunate closing of Connick's firm in 1986. It was at this time that the committee approached Willet to resume the project, starting with 2 chancel windows. Columcille Sharkey designed the panels, the Ascension and the Resurrection, in the manner depicted by the original Connick windows. After Sharkey's passing in 2001, Kenneth Crocker took over the project, adding his own more contemporary stylistic qualities to the traditional scheme in the 32 windows he designed for the fenestration. There is a detail shown of Kenneth Crocker's New Testament window for the Episcopal Church of Saints Peter and Paul, Marietta, Georgia. Jane Collins. In her early teens, Jane Collins showed an interest in both art and religion. After graduation from high school, she joined the Sisters of Mercy Order. She continued her education in both art and religion with her stories at Kutztown University for Art Education and St. Charles Seminary for Scriptural Studies. Upon graduation, she became an elementary and middle school teacher, instructing language skills and art. A visit to Nicaragua in 1986 gave her an enduring interest in social justice issues. During that time, photography and writing also became an important part of her creative life. In 1988, Collins began a new life direction when she left the Sisters of Mercy. Her friendship with famed printmaker Robert McGovern led to an introduction to E. Crosby Willet of the Willet Studios. Subsequently, she joined the Willet Studios as a staff designer, learning the art of stained glass from the studio's talented staff. In her early days of designing, Collins created her works with traditional design mediums, such as paint, pens, and ink. Later, with the rise of digital design media, she eventually designed purely digitally. Collins had designed for both leaded and faceted glass windows, creating contemporary designs for today's architecture. Among the many churches for which she has designed windows are Church of the Palms in Sarasota, Florida, Fernwood Baptist Church in Spartanburg, South Carolina, Queen of Saints, Concord, California, Our Savior Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois, and Black River Falls United Methodist Church in Black River Falls, Wisconsin. There's a picture showing Jane Collins digitally designing in the Chestnut Hill studio. And on the next page, Jane Collins' luminous mysteries designs for Queen of Saints Catholic Church in Concord, California. Charles Z. Lawrence. Charles Z. Lawrence has worked as a stained glass designer and artisan since completing his apprenticeship in 1958. He has worked for many major U.S. stained glass studios, as well as independently accumulating a major body of work on view throughout the country. The high level of his artistic contribution to the discipline was recognized by the Stained Glass Association of America in 1996. Lawrence was the first American artist to receive his Lifetime Achievement Award since the organization's founding in 1903. Lawrence studied design at the Pratt Institute in New York City, and his craft with German-trained stained glass artist Rudolf Buenes. He worked for many of the major United States studios, including Rambusch, Greenland, Wise, Heimer, and Duran. He joined the Willet Studios in 1967 and continued on staff until 1983. He now continues his association with the company as a freelance designer. His many commissions for Willet Hauser Architectural Glass Incorporated include 3 major windows at the Washington, D.C. National Cathedral, as well as a 60-foot wall of faceted glass for the Court Restaurant at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, Washington, D.C., the lobby of Gore Manufacturing Company in Cherry Hill, Maryland, Plymouth Congregational Church, Des Moines, Iowa, the Lutheran Chapel at the M.D. Anderson Hospital in Houston, Texas, Christ Church Episcopal School in Greenville, South Carolina, Moorings Presbyterian Church, Naples, Florida, and 41 windows for Peachtree Road Methodist Church, Atlanta, Georgia. There is a photo of Charles E. Lawrence in the studio. On the next page, a photo showing the completed window by Charles E. Lawrence in situ, the Plymouth Congregational Church, Des Moines, Iowa. And also Lawrence's design for the Healing Arts window at the National Cathedral, Washington, D.C. Following that is a photo showing 3 generations of designers for the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist, Spokane, Washington, Charles J. Connick Associates, Colum Sharkey, and Kenneth Crocker.